All right, with that, I will hand things over to Rua. He is our presenter today. He's the science coordinator for the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. Rua is going to be talking about what's new with the 2022 version of the Southeast Conservation Blueprint that just came out last month. You've been hearing us talk about it for a year, so now it's time to hear all about it and where you can access the data and all that good stuff. So Rua, take it away.
Awesome, will do. Yeah, this is the fun time talking about the blueprint itself. So let's get into it. Somewhere into it here. There we go. All right, so let's talk about this new version of the Southeast Conservation Blueprint, the 2022 version of it. I want to step back just a little bit, talking about the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy. That's what the Conservation Blueprint is under. And the bigger vision here for the whole strategy is this connected network of lands and waters that support thriving fish and wildlife populations and improved quality of life for people. And so the blueprint is helping us figure out, okay, where are those priority areas for that connected network of lands and waters? So some quick background, it is a living spatial plan. So Larry said, we've been working on this for a year, but we update the blueprint every year. So it's a living plan looking for priority areas for that connected network of lands and waters across the Southeast and the Caribbean. Helping a lot of people from a bunch of different organizations bring in new funding and inform their conservation decisions. That's one of the most fun parts about working on the blueprint too, is helping people use it and learning from what's working and what's not, and then making it better every year. And then also, it's this regional perspective to complement local data and knowledge. So that's the idea, is to complement the great information and knowledge y'all already have. And like Hillary showed, this is the new version of the Conservation Blueprint. We've got a lot of cool stuff underneath, so we'll talk about all the stuff underneath, but this is the top level priorities for that connected network of lands and waters and all the different categories, the highest, high, and medium. So the darkest is the highest priority, all the way down to priority connections. So we're going to get into it here, but before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about what's new. So what's new for this year compared to the last blueprint? Well, now across all 15 states, we've got consistent methods and indicators. We have a connectivity analysis with hubs and corridors, a whole bunch of different indicator improvements and new indicators. We have a new SECAS atlas for accessing the data, downloading, pulling up stuff in maps. We also have big updates to the Blueprint Explorer that lets you do all kinds of summaries and reporting and fun stuff too. So got a lot of really cool stuff for this year, kind of a big leap and a whole lot of effort from a whole bunch of folks. And for some context, the inputs for the 2021 Southeast Conservation Blueprint were a number of different plans with slightly different methods and approaches and data. And we'd really just been cobbling them together. So you see them in the different colors. Those little striped areas are overlap zones between multiple inputs. And so it's really just sort of been a quilt of different methods. But as folks have been wanting to use the blueprint over larger areas, big multi-state places, and stuff like that, we've gotten a lot of feedback from folks that they just want consistency. We want the same stuff. We want the same methods. So for this year's version of the blueprint, these are the inputs. We've managed to get, like I said, all 15 states and at least part of the Atlantic, all with the same consistent indicators and metrics. And you'll notice there's a few other places, the Florida Marine Blueprint, that we weren't able to get to consistent methods in, and also the Caribbean Landscape Conservation Design. And so those are ones we still don't have consistent methods there, but we've got plans for finishing off the rest of the Gulf, the Atlantic, the Caribbean for next year. And so we'll have some consistent stuff for everywhere, hopefully in 2023. But this was the big planned bite for this year, all the 15 states. And so hooray, we're now getting way more consistent. So like I just mentioned, the focus for 2023 is expansion of the methods to the Caribbean and the remaining marine areas. So that'll include the Gulf of Mexico across the rest of the states as well. All right, now let's get into the methods for this blueprint across the whole Southeast. And so I'm just going to, we'll talk about each of these different steps as we go through. But basically, we start with a series of natural and cultural resource indicators. We remove some really altered areas like parking lots and things like that. We use indicators to rank the different areas within subregions. We'll talk about how we do that in a little bit. We add connectivity by identifying corridors and linking hubs. So we have that across all of 15 states. And we put it all together. And then that last step is step 6 is stitching together with the other blueprint inputs. So the Florida Marine to capture the rest of the marine area we didn't have, and then also design in Puerto Rico as well. So that's how we add it all up, and we're going to go piece by piece in here. So part 1, starting with those natural and cultural resource indicators. So now that we have them all done, I'm actually going to show it to you on the SECAS Atlas, so you can see for yourself where to take a look at these things. So I'm going to step out of here, and then we'll go into, so this is secassoutheast.org. This is the Southeast Conservation Adaptation Strategy website. And so there's a little blueprint tab right here. And if you scroll down, you've got a few different options for how you can access the data. You can just download it straight. You can start simple in the Explorer, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But let's go ahead and dig deeper into our atlas. This is the new SECAS Atlas. So when I click on this, this is all the data of the Southeast Conservation Blueprint. So you want to download it on your GIS, that's fine. We got a sweet little quick start map that'll have all the stuff preloaded, all the different indicators and things. We got this amazing development process, which is super detailed, all kinds of great stuff, captures a lot of work. Big thanks to a lot of the folks, especially Hillary, on making sure we get our documentation really on point. And so that's exciting. But what I'm going to talk about here is, since I mentioned the indicators, this actually has all the different indicators for what we call the base blueprint. That's that big 15-state area. So we have a number of different terrestrial indicators, some of them covering very specific areas, like the East Coastal Plain Open Pine Birds indicator, and some of them covering the entire Southeast, like our equitable access to potential parks, our intact habitat cores, our greenways and trails. So we have all these different terrestrial indicators, so you can just grab them. They're all free to use. We've got all the documentation. We have code for them if you really want to tuck in there and tweak them. When you download the data, we've included the Python code for making these from the publicly available data sets. So you want to go crazy and tweak them, that's fine. You want to look at them, you want to use them however you want, that's fine too. So we have all these cool terrestrial indicators, trying to capture unique things across the Southeast, but also just core components that are important for that connected network of lands and waters. So terrestrial stuff, we have a number of freshwater indicators, things like imperiled aquatic species, migratory fish habitat, permeable surface, all that fun stuff. And then our coastal and marine indicators as well. So we have coastal condition, shoreline condition. We have a new islands indicator after the workshops, marine mammals, seagrasses. It's fun. So if you want to dive a little bit deeper and see all those underlying pieces, those are all up on the Atlas, or you can download them. And I'll show you another way if you want to look at these as well in a minute. So we have all these different indicators across the bigger area. Then what we do, there we go. All right, so we have all these indicators, and what we're trying to do is make sure that that connected network of lands and waters is getting those high value areas for the different ecosystem indicators. So first thing we have to do in the Pareto prioritization is we remove some very highly altered areas. This gives the algorithm kind of a starting point of places that weren't likely to be in the blueprint anyways, based on the indicators. I like using this aerial photo of Nashville to give you an example. So we're removing, in the prioritization, the really heavily developed areas, the medium high developed. So, again, parking lots, really high impervious spots that weren't going to make it. And also the open water areas of estuaries, because we don't have good indicators to capture those altered waters as well. So this will give you a quick visual of what these gray areas are, the ones that get taken out early. So it's not all the suburbs and green space and all those other pieces. It's just a very small part of the little along roads and heavy developed areas, just to give the algorithm some places to start. We pull those guys out, and then what we do is we use all those indicators to rank areas within a series of subregions in the Southeast. So here are the subregions for 2022. So basically kind of watershed and ecological boundaries. So we're splitting those up. One of the big reasons we split them up in this way is a practical reason. We can't run the algorithm across the entire Southeast, especially with the version that we had available to us at the time. And so what we do is we prioritize within each of these ecological regions. That means this connected network has got representation from all these different places, the Appalachians, the Piedmont, Lower Mississippi Valley, all those different spots. So within each of them, we look in a subregion, and then we run the prioritization within each of those. So what happens is it's not just a stacking exercise. We don't just kind of sum all the different things up and see whatever gets the most points. We're really looking for a portfolio of places that will support all the indicators. Let's get the good stuff in this larger portfolio. And we use a program called zonation to optimize that portfolio and making sure we've got the best, most connected network across all those places. And I'm going to show you in a second what that looks like visually, because I think sometimes just a little visual helps. But in practice, there are two types of places that end up as a high priority. So places with high values for multiple indicators, these are like the no-brainers. They've got lots of super important stuff. Those are the things that will come out no matter what, even if you're doing a kind of stacking exercise and just summing pixels. But we're also able to pick up places with high values for a single indicator that can't be found anywhere else. These are these irreplaceable sort of features. And that's part of the reason of thinking about that portfolio. If you think about, you have a really important ecosystem or species that's just not captured very well with everything else, but it's an important part of the connected network, this lets us think about it as a bigger portfolio. So yeah, those are the two types of places that will come out as high priority. And I'm just going to give you a quick visual of what that looks like in practice. So this is an area north of Durham, North Carolina. I used Missouri in the workshop. So if you've been to the workshops, I figured I'd give you a different picture this time. And yeah, so this is the aerial photo of that area. And you can probably already see where some of the habitat cores are just from the green areas. But this is one of the indicators here, intact habitat cores. So darker areas, darker stuff is higher value. These are the bigger habitat cores. And so if we go back and forth, you can see, okay, so here are the habitat cores that are in this area. So that's one of the indicators it's trying to capture. And now let's take a look at what the blueprint priorities look like in this area. So again, darker colors, higher priority. You also see another class, which I'll talk about in a little bit. These gray areas, these priority connections come from our connectivity analysis as well. So they're capturing key areas between hubs. But in general, if you're looking at these, you can sort of see how it's like, oh, let me try to grab the good stuff. Definitely got to get those biggest hubs. And I want to try to get some of these other medium-sized hubs as well. That's obviously not the whole story, but that's one part of it. Now we'll take a look at resilient terrestrial sites. So these are places that are going to be important for biodiversity, not just now, but into the future with climate change. So this is looking at things like, different soil types and elevation gradients and things like that, combined with the local connectivity and naturalness of an area. So these darker areas basically are the most resilient. So important now and into the future as new species ranges shift. And now as you look, especially those darker green areas, you can see how the blueprint priorities are trying to make sure they get the good stuff out of those resilient terrestrial sites. Right. And yeah, there's obviously some other things going on. You probably already picked out the floodplain boundaries here. And so this is imperiled aquatic species. These darker values have more species of greatest conservation need that are aquatic. And so what the blueprint here is trying to do, these don't really match a lot of the other patterns, at least in the southeast. So it's pretty important to have a separate indicator to capture those patterns of biodiversity in the aquatic areas. So now you see, oh, all right, we want to make sure we're getting these areas that are really important for imperiled aquatic species in the network. And then I'm going to mention one more. This is equitable access to potential parks. So these are places where a new park would create nearby access in social vulnerable communities. So these are areas where you don't have parks nearby, but very vulnerable communities. And again, we go back and forth, and then that's woven into the larger network as well. They're pretty much trying to grab those pieces and put it all together. And so all told, everything, all the different priority classes cover 50% of the area, and that top highest priority is covering 10% of the area. So yeah, that's kind of how it's grabbing the priorities there and figuring that out. Now, before I talk about the connectivity step, a number of you were at the workshops that we had fairly recently, and you got to see early drafts of the priorities without the connectivity analysis, but just the priorities based on the indicators there. And so you'd looked at a piece there. And let's talk about the workshops real quick. All right. So a lot of people, a lot of different organizations attended, more than 400 spatial comments. I think it was like 480 something. It was a lot, which was amazing because we love the feedback. It's so tasty. We gobble it up. So if you weren't there or you were there and you forgot what happened, we basically looked at a draft version of Blueprint priorities and pretty much identified places that looked good, that looked like they were over prioritized or under prioritized, or just places where you had questions. Sometimes they were really big areas, big conceptual landscape things, which you can see in these big ones. Sometimes they were fairly small parcel level things like, hey, this is actually a parking lot now, or this is a burrow pit, or hey, we're missing this important glade habitat. So that kind of stuff, all kinds of different scales. It was super great to have those pieces. And so since the workshops, what we did was, well, we fully or partially fixed about 40% of the comments about specific problems in the draft blueprint. That was like 88 total. And so we were just, working our butts off to try to fix as much as we could before this year's version got final. And everything that we didn't fix is now in the known issues and also in a GIS layer that we can use to target for future updates. And so pretty much now we have this sweet database that, here's an example. This is actually near Cedars of Lebanon State Park in Tennessee. And just here's an example of some information. So this was one of the comments we had. We have the original information about it was under prioritized. This protected area was heavily managed for more open habitats like, interior low plateau glades and barrens. We weren't capturing it very well. And then now we have the post, what happened afterwards. Did we fix it? In this case, it's almost all high priority now that we updated the grasslands indicator post workshop. So some things we were able to fix, some things we weren't. Anything we couldn't fix, we tried to at least figure out what it would take to fix them and what the issue was going on underneath. And now we have this sweet, sweet database. So if you're at a workshop and you provided that comments, just know that we still have it, we're using it, we continue to use it for prioritization and testing. And we even went back, if you reviewed in other plans, like we even pulled forward comments from previous South Atlantic Blueprint workshops as well, in addition to these, just to make sure that they were captured. So yeah, we love feedback. We treat it very nicely. Yeah. So that's after the workshops. We fixed as much as we could. We documented what we couldn't fix. And then functionally, after that, workshops as well, got busy with hubs and corridors. So these are least cost path connectivity analysis to identify connections between priority areas. So basically, we have these hubs across the landscape, and then we have corridors that are trying to go through as much blueprint priority as possible over the shortest possible distance. And that's now available. Previously, we had these in parts of the geography. Now we have them consistent across the whole area. And one big hurdle we had to overcome, and thanks to Amy, our GIS genius, who figured this out, is that the connectivity software linkage mapper that we did wouldn't even run across the entire Southeast. It was too big. It just choked on everything. And so she came up with a really slick approach to running it in buffered hexagons in order to basically run it over a really big area, but not lose any information or connections across them. So every time we go bigger, we have to run into new adventures. But yeah, that's overcome. And so now we've got this new connectivity layer that you can use, and that's also up on the hub. Very excited about that. And then we also build that into the priority connections. So that priority connections class is basically things that don't come out as a high priority in the blueprint, but didn't come out in these other priority classes, but are important for connecting those different hubs. So that is in there, and there's lots more information up on the website and in the documentation, which I can show you again real quick in a second. One thing I wanted to mention relates to climate resilience in the blueprint. This question comes up a lot. How does the blueprint account for climate change and sea level rise and all those different pieces? And so there's a lot of different components, specifically the blueprint specifically targeted as a response to future changes out on the landscape. And the big strategies for resilience here, one is about resilient sites and conditions. So what are these things? And I mentioned that the TNC, they're the resilient sites as one example of them, but there are a number of conditions that are particularly resilient to climate change. So as species moves, these are still going to be important. So if you think about things like, large patches of natural habitat, okay, that's still important. Low permeable surface in the watershed, natural land covers in the floodplain, aquatic connectivity, terrestrial connectivity. So we really build on a lot of these things, regular fire in most of the southeastern ecosystems. These are sites and conditions that are important now in these systems, but also as species ranges shift, as things shift, they're going to continue to be important. So Blueprint really focuses on these things that are resilient to climate change. And then connectivity, which I already mentioned a little bit of those, but really focused on terrestrial and aquatic connectivity to make sure species can get to those new conditions and can access those new sites into the future. And the last one is just regular updates, basically coming in and updating the blueprint as we learn more about kind of resilience and change in those pieces. As the landscape changes, we've already updated the blueprint multiple times with new land cover and new things as the landscape changes. So we're trying to keep pace with our learning and looking forward, but also keep pace with how the landscape is already changing. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the Blueprint Explorer really quickly. We have some of the features in here already, which is super exciting. So here we are. Let's go right back to where we were. So we were back on this website. Yeah, so this is that Blueprint website again. And we're going to go to this Start Simple in the Explorer piece. And so now we've got the Southeast Conservation Blueprint Explorer. We talk about it almost as like the Google Maps of version of how you can access the information. And so the Explorer is particularly good for kind of interactively looking at things, around watersheds, or if you have shape files or things you want reports on. So you can zoom in on, pick a random place here. Right now, what we have in the Explorer is a couple of features. One, you can zoom into these little sub-watersheds. These are sort of Hub 12s here. And as you click on one, it'll give you all kinds of sweet information, stuff about the blueprint priorities, the hubs and corridors, information on all the indicators that are in here. So in this case, now we're in the lower Mississippi Valley. So we have some information on forest bird protection, reforestation. We have information on fire frequency, a whole bunch of the aquatic indicators as well. So we can go into these pieces. Let's look at the reforestation priorities. And now we have all the information about that particular indicator, what it's telling you in that watershed. And you can, if you want to explore the GIS data, get into the all gory details and documentation, then you can go ahead and this links right back to that indicator on the SECAS Atlas. So it lets you do that. Also lets you do sweet stuff like look at threats. This area is less exciting in urbanization just because it's right next to a floodplain. But we now have past and future trends. So predicting where, what's urban look like in the past, and then where is it going into the future. So we have an updated model for that as well. And then sea level rises and some interesting here. And also information about the conservation lands ownership, protected status, and also this will basically find you land trusts within 25 miles of this area. So it grabs those as well for that spot. So that's this summary. And the other fun thing you can do, which we use pretty heavily, is you can run reports on these different things. So you could run a report. It just takes like maybe 30 seconds or so. You can upload your own shapefile on this. And so here, upload shapefile piece. So you can go ahead and put your little area of interest in there and upload a shapefile. Or if, as you're exploring these little watersheds, like I think I showed before, you can just go ahead and this export detailed maps and analysis will make a really sweet map for you with all kinds of additional information as well. So I ran one in Texas a second ago. Like I said, they only take 30 seconds, but didn't want to waste your time looking at them. So this was one of the ones outside Dallas, is the Deep Branch 10-mile creek subwatershed. And when you get this report, you get all kinds of goodies summarizing your particular area. So if you've got a focus area, you have a parcel you're doing a proposal for, you can just put that information in. It'll give you stuff about the blueprint priorities, sort of acres and percent of area, but it'll give you hubs and corridors, but it'll also give you all the different stuff for the indicators as well. So if you want to look at Great Plains perennial grasslands within your spot, you can take a look at what that indicator says, and you'll get all the nice summary stuff. So again, doing a lot of the GIS summary stuff that you might need to do when looking at a focus area, this will save you a whole bunch of time. So it does that for all the different indicators, gives you stuff about the habitat cores, resilient sites. Okay, what percent of my site and how many acres are above average resilience? You can just grab that stuff out of the table. And it also gives you stuff on threats as well, which I'm trying to fast forward here. Sea level rise, well, it looks really cool, but I didn't pick a sea level rise one. Here's the urban growth predictions here. So you've got a map looking at sort of probability of urbanization by 2060. And you also have some predictions of acreage into the future as well. And we include some nice little sound bites. We try to figure out like, okay, if you're doing a kind of report, looking at a focus area, putting together a proposal, and you just need what's the quick sound bite to use. We try to include those as well. So just like, oh, I just need to write something about urban and I just only have one sentence. So we include those in the reports as well. So you can just cut and paste them. Same thing on conservation lands ownership. If you want to see who's owning what in the area and summarizing that for your area of interest, you can do that as well. So yeah, that's what's in there right now, these big summaries and the reporting if you want to upload your shapefile. We've got two other super fun things that are coming very soon. One is the pixel level identifier. So right now we're summarizing by watershed, but we also have the technology where you can literally just go in and be like, what's going on in this pixel here? And then super quick, it tells you about the indicator underneath. So you can you can explore and look around and figure out what's going on with the indicators underneath. And then the other thing that we're shooting for in next year is basically filtering by these different indicators. So you'll be able to look, and we've got early tests of this running, which is so much fun to play with. You could think about like, okay, here's this big area, the blueprint, and oh wow, that's still 50% of the landscape. Where's my part of the blueprint? Where's the part that aligns with what I'm looking for? And so we've got filtering where you could come in and use some of these different indicators and pieces and say, okay, here's the whole blueprint. Just show me the parts of the blueprint that are resilient to they're above average resilience in the terrestrial resilient sites, and are important for equitable access to potential parks. You can just see those. Or you could say, show me a place that's threatened by urban growth that's important for imperiled aquatic species. You know, all those kind of fun things you could do. You know, look at areas for restoration, for, okay, what's got a little bit, not a lot of, maybe, you know, 70% or so, or some smaller percentage of natural land cover in the floodplain, but it's important for imperiled aquatic species, and it's important for something else. That's pretty much what we've got in development. Very exciting about that. Yeah, so that's the Blueprint Explorer. I said before, on the Blueprint page, you can go ahead and access that in the Start Simple in the Explorer, and we'll let you know when all the new additional fun features are out as well. Then peace. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to hit on was basically just this idea of, you know, the blueprints providing this regional perspective for your local information. And so, yeah, we can help you put your work into a larger context. And we've got user support staff that can help you use the blueprint to complement other local information. So if you're like, huh, I'm interested in using the blueprint, I don't quite know how, and I don't know how to combine it with the data I'm using, but I'm interested in trying. Well, we got folks that'll help you out for free. That's our job. That's how we learn and improve on the blueprint itself. And so there's also contact info on the SECAS staff page. Now you can always just, you know, you can email Hillary, since she was the one that sent the web forum invitation. But I will show you on the staff page here, so we go back, there is a staff page which shows you all the amazing people behind this 2022 version of the blueprint. So there's me, I'm the science coordinator. And here's our blueprint user support folks. And so everyone's got sort of different states they work on, and different expertise. So we've got a little bit of just background. We try to make sure we've got full coverage, no matter where you are in the Southeast, of support. And so if you want to if you got some specific interest in giving a shout out to somebody, they are here to help you. Like I said, for free. It's fun. It's part of what we do. And yeah, and then also if you want to see our amazing Blueprint GIS staff, there's Amy, who did the corridor stuff, Blair and Yvonne, who did a ton of modeling as well as Amy on the indicators, and then Jose, who made the amazing workshop feedback tool. And the reason why we have all these great comments in such a great place. And there's also Todd, who's our species liaison. So especially if you're thinking about very specific species status assessment, at-risk stuff, he's also there to help as well. So yeah, lots of great folks, smiling faces. But if you're interested in trying to use the blueprint, just give us a shout. We're glad to help. And with that, I think that's all I got.
So much, Rua, for that great presentation. We have plenty of time for questions. There's already been a great number of questions in the chat, so really appreciate y'all dropping those in. One suggestion from David Linicum, maybe adding the ability to draw a shape file in the Explorer in addition to being able to upload one. We'll definitely continue to discuss that with our developer. It's a great suggestion. The workaround that we currently provide, and I'll just share my screen super fast so you can see where this is. There's another nifty little website where you can draw a shape file. It's called geojson.io. It's just this really quick and dirty little thing where you can draw a shapefile here, export it, and then upload that instead of actually drawing it within the Explorer. So that's kind of a way around that in the meantime. A question about the availability of map services. The indicators, all of the indicators have map services. That's how we made them available in our new SECAS Atlas. So each one has an ArcGIS Online map service. It's a tiled image service, which is kind of a new fancy type of map service that enables some new things in AGOL. So if you have any trouble finding the map service for an indicator that you're looking feel free to reach out. I'm still learning AGOL as we've been building this atlas, and it can be a little tricky to find stuff. And then the other question was about demographic information and whether there's any demographic information currently available in the viewer. Not yet, with the possible exception of you could maybe think of our equitable access to potential parks indicator, which does bring in some information on social vulnerability. So that's one of our indicators that's looking at opportunities to fill open space gaps in socially vulnerable communities. So there is a little bit of that social vulnerability index aspect to that indicator, but we don't have other demographic information in there yet. But it's a great suggestion. Any other, just a brief recap of the chat for the recording and anybody who wasn't watching that. Any questions? We can probably do 10 minutes for questions, so don't be shy. Greg Wathen, I see your hand. Jump on in.
Hey, Rua, good to see you all. It's been a while. Excellent presentation, Rua. Really, you guys have made so much progress on this blueprint, and I am so happy to see Tennessee being represented in the indicators and the Explorer. So that's really cool. I'm working a lot in West Tennessee right now with some folks looking at floodplains and nature conservancy, so forth and so on. So I showed them this map yesterday at a meeting that we had, and really looking. I just found it last week. I knew you all were doing the update, but hadn't really looked at it until just last week. The question I have is relative to citizen science and applications like eBird and iNaturalist and some of these platforms where people are, uploading their observations of different species. Are you guys thinking about using any of that citizen science to try to refine where species are being observed or not observed? And I'm especially looking at like the Southeast regional species of greatest conservation need and some of those high priority species like that. So sort of a general question about that.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, definitely. I mean, some of the pieces we have that we end up using do use citizen science information. Sometimes I know we've definitely used over the last few years eBird locations on testing and validating indicators, especially on the bird ones, and the same front with iNaturalist grassland plant species records. And also this, there's some stuff we're working on related to, and again, these are ones we're scoping. We don't know, will it actually become an indicator? We don't know. But we have been experimenting with some things related to pollinators and training some models based on iNaturalist data and observations as well. So yes, looking very closely. There's some embedded already, and there's some we've already used in testing, but we're actively exploring a bunch of different opportunities because those are, again, great opportunities for either testing or just directly using in indicators.
Okay, very cool. Well, it's good to hear that. I'll be interested in seeing how that moves along. I'll reach out to Emily Grandstaff for further consultation on the blueprint, though. So, but thanks again for that. Really good presentation. So.
Oh yeah, Amy mentioned the crowdsourced roads and trail data. So that was one of the major citizen science pieces we use is coming from OpenStreetMap, and so that's a giant open citizen science thing.
Very good.
Great point, Amy.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Greg.
Anybody else have a question?
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, this is just an amazing piece of work. That's all I have to say. It's a really nice work. Going to use it too.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, let us know, if you need any help using it, we're glad to help. And, even if you're just using it on your own on stuff like that, feel free to send us some feedback on how you're using it or what's working well and what's not. I mean, we're in this great position of being able to support this long term and keep improving it over time.
What's your funding source? Who's funding this?
So most of the funding is coming from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Other organizations provide other stuff, information, but our biggest safety net for staff and funding is coming from the Fish and Wildlife Service in the science applications.
And it's sustainable. I mean, you don't have to go up every year you have a long-term commitment on the funding, so you can breathe a little bit easy on it.
As much as any, federal stuff is, the more safe, but as much as anything does. I mean, we've had base funding for more than 10 years. And it seems like we're in good position for that. I mean, this is one of the great things. And I mean, again, as frustrating as it is sometimes as far as trying to share data, when you have federal resources, one of the nice things is that we don't have to spend the time going out chasing money everywhere just to do stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you end up having to, as a lot of nonprofits or you're in academic world, you can't just go do stuff. So we get to focus on really helping people with their conservation decisions and helping try to bring in new resources to the area and not have to focus, trying to get that stuff on the ground instead of worrying about the stuff to support the science. So we've been pretty lucky, and I don't see anything. Made it through multiple administrations. So we're in a good shape as best as we can know.
It's no small accomplishment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. And one part of my job is sort of keeping track of the ways that people are using the blueprint in their work. So we have a good sense of most common ways that people are using it, what are the good things and the drawbacks that they're running into. So I would love to hear more about how you're using the blueprint in your work if you had a time to jot down a couple sentences or chat briefly some other time offline. So thanks for letting me know.
You can do that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And I see two things in the chat. I think, David, thanks for that on the range mapping piece. I have a project going on. Todd Jones, Fran, myself, and a few of us are on a project with NatureServe, working on integrating some of the range mapping stuff that they've been doing in species modeling across the whole Southeast, and seeing if we can use. Partly, we haven't been able to use and share stuff just yet, but we are exploring the use of those data and also the use of some of the updated range maps coming out of the Fish and Wildlife Service too for some of these species. So yeah, looking into that.
In fact, that's a perfect segue, because that's going to be the focus of our next Third Thursday Web Forum, which will be in the new year. Dr. Healy Hamilton with NatureServe will be presenting on that. So I'm glad that came up. But sorry, Rua, back to you.
Yeah, no, perfect. And Healy's been great, very supportive of the blueprint for a long time. And so that's exciting. Yeah, and then Daniel's question about incorporating invasive species information into the blueprint for both terrestrial and aquatic species. So that's one that we have looked into in the past. I was just having a conversation about that with a few other people just yesterday. We haven't found the right data set and best approach yet on the threat side, but definitely actively exploring that and talking with folks. There's some good interest in that, like you said, on the aquatic and the terrestrial side of things. And then, yeah, Lynette, you're asking about prioritizing the connections. Yeah, that's another one. We partly, I would say, we sucked up a lot of time and our energy trying to do this big 15-state expansion. But we have talked about looking at methods of how to prioritize some of those connections already. So we have the connections and we have the important pieces. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff we can do with the corridors and some cool methods. So and as a side note on all these questions are really helpful in guiding what we do and what we prioritize. As you can tell, there's a lot of really awesome stuff we could be doing. And so when people ask some of these questions, as it comes up, as people have interest in it, that helps us kind of prioritize to be like, well, this is not just something we want to do as staff, but this is something we're hearing about from users and people on forums and stuff like that. So it's like mentally votes for doing some of this stuff. But yes, definitely looking at that.
Yeah, we had an interesting we're sort of using these methods just in the South Atlantic about how to balance. Corridors are just a tricky and interesting thing because you want to balance the fact that the landscape itself is changing, things are developing, things are being restored, and we want corridors to reflect those changes. At the same time, if corridors change too much from one version of the blueprint to another, we want the corridors to reflect the fact that action is happening on the ground. Some of these places create corridor moves too much, that might be kind of disruptive to those partners. And so we've got a lot of ideas on how to really make the corridors reflect the work that's happening on the ground and the ways that like local conservation practitioners are really implementing corridors and creating connections. And we look forward to getting back to thinking and talking more about some of those things now that we've kind of got our consistent methods working.
I will say though, like on the corridor, another thing that I didn't mention that we have in just a few places where we had data, but I think there's good opportunities to expand is integrating road crossings into those corridors. So this was one that Amy worked on and has a really cool approach where we pretty much build in information about those road crossings. So if we know where the crossing is and we know especially kind of where the fencing and stuff is, and we've done this in this current version of the blueprint in a few places that we had road crossing data, the corridors can actually see that and it routes the corridor through the road crossing or like, you know, potential area where we see a lot of crossings. So that's another area we can grow. We had pretty limited data on it, on where they were before, but that's a really cool thing, being able to route those corridors where the crossings are.
Any other questions? We could probably take one or two more before we move on. Oh, another one from Daniel in the chat, how the blueprint captures areas of importance that might be data deficient for any of the indicators.
Yeah, and so that's what we're trying as much as possible to look at those places. And that's one of the big reasons we kind of, there's really great data sets that we only end up using for validation because they have these big holes in places. And it's just because people haven't looked. So we do try to integrate, test and look for those spots and focus in on spots that are kind of data deficient. But when we do have known places that are data deficient, we put them in the known issues. So let me share this real quick. So going back to, here's that Hillary mentioned before, if you want to draw a shapefile, if you click on the upload shapefile in the viewer, it actually gives you that link to the draw your GeoJSON thing. Okay, let me go back to here. I'm going to go to the blueprint. You can find this in multiple ways, but I just wanted to highlight out the known issues because I didn't talk about it a lot. If you scroll down, there's this little known issues section. And so you can get to the known issues page. And this has all the known issues we have: uplands, wetlands, species-specific ones, freshwater, marine. So this is everything we know about. And you mentioned some of the data deficient pieces. So here's one example. Like we have some challenges with seeing managed grasslands, like good quality grasslands. And so we try to capture ones that are missing, that we don't have knowledge of. The remote sensing isn't picking them up. The data we have isn't picking them up. So we try to call them out specifically in places where we know they are. And same thing goes for a lot of different indicators. So sometimes if it's a data deficiency thing, on a particularly challenging indicator, we at least try to document that of like, yeah, this is the data deficient part. Partly just so everyone knows that it's not perfect, but also sometimes, sometimes the blueprint gets used and people ask questions. Well, hey, if you're not a blueprint priority, why not? And to be able to go to the known issues and be like, well, actually, we should be a higher priority, but like you can see right here, Caddo National Grasslands in Texas is like under prioritized in the blueprint. So as much as possible, we try to rely on things that don't have any kind of holes, but sometimes, sometimes it happens. And so we try to document it as best we can.
That was a great question. Any others? Let's take maybe one more. All right, not hearing any. Let me go ahead and wrap up by previewing next month's web forum here. Get my slides back up. And then we'll pause again for questions at the end in case anything else occurs to you in the meantime. So next month's web forum, we've actually canceled. We usually don't hold one in December just because so many people are out of town around the holidays, but we'll be back with this web forum on January 19th. There'll be more details to come on this, but as I mentioned when that question came up in the chat, we're going to be hosting Dr. Healy Hamilton with NatureServe, who's going to be talking about some of their work on imperiled species distribution in the U.S. So they did publish this new map of extinction risk for over 2,000 of the most imperiled species in the conterminous United States. And as part of that analysis, they created 30-meter species habitat models for all of the G1, G2, and ESA listed vertebrates, vascular plants, crayfishes, mussels, and select pollinators. So there was a lot of work that went in with state natural heritage programs to review and really vet those models. And there's hundreds of those species that occur in the Southeast Blueprint. So in the Southeast Blueprint geography. So we're going to be doing some testing with them as part of that project that Rua mentioned to look at how well the blueprint is capturing those imperiled species and looking at ways to potentially incorporate some of that new data into the blueprint. So that's going to be a really good presentation, and hope you will join us January 19th at 10 a.m. Same connection information as today. And with that, I'm going to skip staff updates since Rua pretty much covered what's new with us. So how to get more involved in SECAS, I always like to end on this slide. Please do sign up for the SECAS newsletter at secassoutheast.org. There's an opportunity to sign up for the newsletter on the footer of any page. It'll get you not only our monthly newsletter, but a reminder email about this web forum. Otherwise, we won't bug you. It's just max 2 emails a month. You're obviously welcome to connect with SECAS staff. Rua showed the contact information that's available on our staff page. You can see what partners are participating in SECAS governance on the partners page. And then, of course, we really encourage you to explore this new Southeast Blueprint. Reach out for help if you'd like help incorporating it into a decision or to strengthen a grant proposal. And then let us know how it's working for you. If you're running into issues or something that's working really well for you that you want to make sure we don't change next year, all that feedback is incredibly helpful and really drives our revision cycle. So we'd love to hear from you. With that, I'll pause again, see if anyone has any more questions for me or Rua before we go ahead and close out. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate you tuning in. Have a great holiday season, and we will see you in 2023. It'll be here before we know it. Bye, everybody.
Very well. See ya.